And with that, we are at the end of Godot Con. It's the day after the last day of Godot Con, and I thought I'd drop my sort of final day summary and overview of the con and where I think it's going in the future. So yeah, let's do that. Right, final day, woke up a bit late, got there. There was one workshop on CPU multi-threading I really wanted to get to that was not great for beginners and not great for more serious discussion. It was kind of loosey-goosey. It was lovely talk. It was a lovely workshop, but yeah, it definitely should have been aimed at one of the two audiences. And I think that's really where we get to the crux of it. I also had a lovely chat with Emmy, who heads the Godot Foundation. That was a very useful chat and it was lovely to meet him in person. There's so many people that I met in person. It was lovely because you'd only ever chatted to them over text or video chat. So all very, very lovely. Though largely, as I said before, I feel somewhat disconnected from the Godot community. Like the Godot contributors and people working on the engine, I feel more connected to, but the community at large, yeah, it's a thing, right? So let's talk about where the con is. Honestly, amazing con, but very much focused at hobbyists and amateurs and people doing their first commercial game. I've said before, the fact that it's based on a weekend kind of should signal that to you. So yeah, let's talk, because I think some people want Godot Con to do certain things and other things and whatnot, and I'll sort of just give my perspective on it. There's a lot of different events. I go to a lot of different events. There's sort of in the tiers of professionalism, I'll sort of break it down into 5 tiers. The top tier is like an executive conference, an invite only, very high ticket price kind of conference. They're all about small meetings. They're all about investment. They're generally like a one-track conference, small, modest, usually in an extravagant location, hotel conference usually. Yeah, that's like the top tier. Very much there for investments, decision makers, people who are time poor. Yeah, that's kind of the structure of an executive conference. Then I would say we would have the professional conference. The professional conference being sort of the develops of the world, the GDCs of the world. It gets a bit muddy here because there's what I call a professional conference, and then there's what I would call sort of a trade show conference, and there's it muddies whether I think GDC actually is more of a trade show conference than a professional conference. But professional conferences generally are they're during the week always. They are 1 or 2 tracks, maybe 3 tracks of talks max usually. Speakers are highly sought after speakers usually. If there is an expo area, it's very small. It's mostly high-tier exhibits and things like that. And ticket price is expensive, not crazy over the top, but expensive, like $1,000, maybe like 500 quid, somewhere in that range. And then you would have sort of the trade conference, right? And I think this is actually where Develop and GDC mostly fall in. They have a big expo area. They're generally accessible to the whole sort of professional community, whatever that is for that particular trade. And a lot of it is, focused at the sort of the people working in the trade, not necessarily the people running the business, though there is a lot of stuff targeted towards them. But there's a lot of sort of, in a bigger company, there's a lot of people who are like in hiring or procurement roles or whatever. So there's a lot of people sort of targeted across the range. The talks, all over the board. There's a mix of sponsored talks and sort of normal talks. A lot of parties, trade conferences, all the really good stuff gets done at parties or at private sort of satellite events that go around the conference. That's typically how a trade conference works. And sort of a step down from that, I would say you would get an enthusiast conference. I think this is firmly where I'd put Godot at this point. But I'd also put a few other things there. So these tend to be, they're not advertised to the general public, so to speak. They are advertised within a closed community. So this is often like built around a special interest, built around a special community, a subgroup, something like that. And honestly, these conferences range across the board. They usually have cheaper ticket entry prices, usually on the weekend. This is firmly where Godot is. And then the sort of I don't want to say the bottom tier, because it's not about bottom tier. It's just about a sort of tier list of how accessible these things are. I would put the Comic-Cons or the pop culture conferences. And I've got experience with these as well, because my wife writes books, I've done comics, I've got a lot of friends who do comics, I've got friends who run those conferences. So I've sort of seen the gamut, if you will. And I think a lot of people would argue to push Godot Con towards sort of up that scale of professionalism. And I don't think that's actually a good idea. I think pretty much keeping Godot Con where it is a good place. If you do want to scale up Godot Con, I think looking more down towards the broader conventions, which is like, if you look at, I'm trying to think of a community that starts really niche but goes big. But if you look at like a Star Trek conference, or you look at like a furry conference or whatever, when those get big, they tend towards the Comic-Con route rather than towards the professional route. Because I think a big complaint is a lot of people wanted to be here at Godot Con and they couldn't attend because there was only so many tickets, right? And I myself, I was on the wait list, and I got popped off the wait list as people cancelled their tickets, and I got my ticket. So even I would probably not have been here if it wasn't for the wait list thing. So that being said, I think if you do want to expand the con, you do want to get more people here, I think it's more looking towards that sort of pop culture conference, and the sort of large attendance scales, smaller stages. So generally at those conferences you would have like a couple of areas where talks or workshops are being done, but the expectation is that, say you've got 1,000 people at the conference at any given time, or at the event I should say, at any given time, probably in the region of 200 tops of those people are going to be actively in a talk or a workshop. Most people are going to be going around the expo area, talking to friends, eating food, all that kind of stuff. Those conferences tend to be a lot more unstructured. They tend to have sort of two vendor areas. That is one vendor area for sort of professional corporate vendors, people paying a decent price. And then there is effectively like the artist alley area or small merchant area. And this is minimal services. Like you don't normally get like power sockets and things like that, but obviously for a Godot Con you'd probably want power sockets, but you get like sort of minimal service, and you get like a tiny table, and usually the table is somewhat subsidized in the sense of like the conference is not making money off small merchants, but small merchants kind of define the con because it's kind of an extension of the community, and it's almost like a volunteer force, really. On that note, by the way, volunteers, oh my god, this conference could not have run without them. There were so many volunteers doing a lot of work. Really appreciate that. And then I think a lot of people are going to counter that and say, hey, maybe Godot should be more professional. Maybe it should be like a GDC or a develop. Frankly, there's not enough people to support it. There's not enough people who are working professionally in Godot to support that. And I think Godot is better served going into those spaces, sort of like going to a GDC or going to develop or going to a Gamescom, being in the business area and then serving that. Something I'm very disappointed by is it sounds like the foundation has basically been steered away from that and being blocked from that by certain board members, because obviously there's commercial interests at play, and a lot of people are sort of tangentially interested in Godot. And I think if you go to a Gamescom or you go to a GDC, W4 wants a booth, right? And W4 wants to be seen as that sort of face of Godot to sort of commercially engage with. And I think that's a shame, right? Because there is actually if you go to these trade conferences, like there's Yuki and there's a lot of like industry and union and charity organizations that have a sort of representational presence there, and usually bring along some commercial partners, but it's usually more in a sort of bigging people up sort of aspect and sort of engaging in things, because obviously the foundation can seek support from the industry, right? And I think what I'd love to see is Emmy or people from the foundation going to a GDC or a develop and sort of talking about the use case for why more companies should engage with Godot, why more corporate sponsorships should be there, and sort of just talking to commercial companies and saying, hey, this is how you can engage with the foundation, rather than going, we can't be in those spaces because a lot of our board members are representing their commercial interests, and that commercial interest is W4, and they're there, and da. So I think it's an interesting split. It's an interesting split. But I do think Godot Con is very much for the communities, for the people, and I think should probably stay where it is or move towards the Comic-Con sort of aspect. But yeah, it's a tricky decision, and as I say, I know a lot of people who run events. It's very tough. That being said, all in all, good con. No new information. Was not worth me attending. I enjoyed it. I had fun. I'm treating this as a holiday time. But in terms of a business expense, like, you know, if someone who was running a studio and was interested in Godot, or was, you know, if there was a professional entity who was like, oh, I want to go to Godot Con, I would probably say skip it. I would probably say engage through other routes. This is probably not the place. This is the place for the Discord, for the Reddit, for the forums, for all the contributors, for all the people come together and basically, you know, encourage each other on and support each other. And this is much more sort of a community, and it's a grassroots effort, and it shows in so many ways. And that's a good thing, because this is what this space needs. Yeah. I find it really interesting, actually. The UK doesn't currently have a Godot user group, and I think that's largely because the UK's got such an established games industry presence that people don't feel the need for it. You know, that's kind of what I think. I think there's so many routes in the UK to work in the games industry, and there's so many sort of get-togethers that are technology agnostic, that I don't think people are sort of feeling the pressure to set up a Godot group, if it will, you know. Right, anything else I want to say about it? No, not really. I do think about, like, maybe there's more ways I can engage with the Godot community specifically, but I am very short on time, and if I can engage with the Godot community, I'd rather sort of shoot over code and contribute to the engine. I think that's a more meaningful contribution that I can make personally, though I do think it is a bit of a silent contribution in that way, and you know, I think that's really the thing that shone through me at Godot Con, is that, like, Godot is primarily powered by its community and by unpaid labor. You know, whether it's the volunteers working at the con, whether it is the majority of commits that are coming from individuals who are not paid. You know, like, there is a lot of people who are just giving to the community, and yeah, I think it's good to see people do that. And I think you know, one of the nice things about Godot is if you engage with it as a commercial entity, you are under no obligation legally to give back. But I think obviously it's a good thing as a sort of honest community member, and as sort of a, like, long-term value of this thing you're building on top of, to contribute to it. So yeah, hopefully we see more people commercially entering in the Godot space and contributing to that. And Godot Con, huge success. Don't know if I'll be back. Don't think I will be back. But hey, I'm gonna go enjoy Berlin for the time I have before my flight today, and get back to it. Yeah, I think that's everything. It's a long everything. God, that's almost 15 minutes. Yikes. Boy.